This will be part 2 in the series on natural selection. We'll use the stick insects to look at some of the finer points of the process. This species lives in Malaysia. First topic, we'll take a look at variation. Now, reproduction produces variation, which is necessary for selection to occur. The variations are the differences that might make a difference to survival. Without variation, there can be no selection process. Nobody would have a relative advantage. It's important to note that reproduction produces random variation. Neither the parents nor the environment have control over the process that produces this variation. And what would that really mean? Well, consider the story of the stick insects. So the ancestral population enters into a region with sticks. The idea here of randomness is that just because there's sticks here, the new environment does not cause useful variations. Right? So the environment with sticks does not cause certain mutations to make offspring more stick-like. There's no way that the stick-like environment can get down into the DNA and influence the production of sex cells so the next generation looks more like a stick. We now know, of course, that mutations arise when during DNA duplication there can be errors that happen. The protein machinery sort of makes a mistake when copying DNA. And these DNA copy errors or mutations are random in the sense that there's no way for the cell's DNA duplication machinery to know which error would make a more stick-like body. So the stick environment can't influence this process, neither can the parents. The parents are looking around saying, hey, we're in a bunch of sticks here, let's have more stick-like babies. They can't influence this process either. So the variation is random with respect to the sort of characteristics of the environment and what would be a good trait or a bad trait. Now, while DNA mutations produce some genetic variation in sex cells, meiosis produces greater variation in sex cells, thus allowing for faster evolutionary change in a species. And this is thought to be one of the reasons why most species on Earth engage in sexual reproduction. It produces greater amounts of variation, and we now know that the variation is the fuel for evolutionary change. Now, we previously learned that meiosis is responsible for producing sex cells, and during meiosis there's a mixing of parental genes. Here we see the process over here. This would be an immature sex cell going through meiosis, a 2-division event resulting in cells that have half the number of chromosomes, but importantly, they have unique combinations of the mother and father chromosomes. Something very important happens early in meiosis. The mom and dad chromosomes get together and they exchange genetic information. So there are breaks along the chromosomes, and then when the chromosomes reattach, we have one section from father, one section from mother, and likewise on the other chromosome. And so this is creating variation in the genetic information in the sex cells. If we think about mutations, maybe the dad has a mutation in this gene up here and mom has a mutation on her chromosome down here in a different gene. Well, a recombination event that happens in between those two genes is going to create a chromosome with 2 bad mutations and a chromosome that has none. We can think of this as sort of a fixing process, that recombination event fixed one of the chromosomes, the other one got a double dose of bad mutations, and now this chromosome will end up in some of the sex cells, this chromosome will end up in some of the different sex cells. So natural selection now is going to be favoring the chromosome that does not have the mutations, eliminating individuals made with sex cells that had this chromosome here. And we can, just as we can think about bad mutations, we can think about good mutations. So again, the process of meiosis is going to be mixing these parental genes in ways that then are subject to the forces of natural selection. So the take-home point here is that variation is generated by biological processes without regard to the needs of the species in a certain environment. Some individuals are just going to have good mutations or a good mixing of parental genes, and others less so. Now, while variation is random, natural selection is a non-random process. Remember, the predators here are not just randomly eating their prey. They're eating the ones that they see. So there's going to be an unequal chance of survival because of the variation in body shape. So this is a non-random selection process. If it were a random selection process, the predators would sometimes eat the thinner bodies and just as often eat the thicker bodied ones. But that's not how it happens. There is an unequal chance of survival. So as the most stick-like body shape each generation is non-randomly selected, the trait becomes more frequent in the population and can even improve. So again, with the variation and a non-random selection process, you get the evolution of the population towards greater and greater fitness to its local environment. In this case, stick-like bodies that are good camouflage to avoid predators. So there's no goal or end state to evolutionary change, as there is when humans purposely select traits in domesticated plants and animals. Rather, the result of natural selection is simply better adapted species to their local environments. And so, natural selection is a natural cause and effect process that produces well-camouflaged insects, but there's no intelligence, in a sense, driving this process. Natural selection produces the appearance of design without an intelligent mind. And here we'll just leave with a couple of the key points mentioned in the two-part series on natural selection.